Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check the link above to my Patreon page. I'm here with the last installment of my sideboard guide for my blue-green Merfolk list now that Rivals of Ixalan is about to come out on Magic Online in just a couple days on Monday. So I want you guys to know what I'm going to be testing. My main deck is over here in this gray section to the left. And the previous video, I talked about, previous two videos, I talked about my methodology for choosing cards in my sideboard. And then in the second video, I went over my sideboarding decisions for the top tier decks, basically in Modern, the top 2/3 of the format. But now in this final video, I'm going to go through the last 33% of the meta, not the entire thing because it's just too many decks. But 11 decks that I consider pretty relevant that you wouldn't be too surprised to run into at a given tournament. So yeah, let's just get started. The first one up here is Blue Moon. You can see I consider it about an even matchup. There's a couple of things in our favor, and there's a couple of things that go against us. First of all, going by the name, they play a lot of islands, and they give us island walk. They don't have a lot of creatures. Generally, if we can establish a board, they're not going to be able to resist us very easily. So there's that. The other part of the name is Moon, which unfortunately talks about Blood Moon, which is a little bit difficult against all of our non-basics. However, we do have 3 Spell Pierces, and we have more help from the sideboard to deal with Blood Moon. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at a Blue Moon list. Now, it's just blue-red. They run 4 Emrakuls and 4 Through the Breach. So that's like the main combo in the deck, is they're trying to slam an Emrakul. So of course our Dispels, our Negates, our Disdainful Strokes are all going to be great against Through the Breach, also Spell Pierce. What we have to be concerned about is stopping a Blood Moon from getting onto the table. We have to post board, so prevent an Anger of the Gods, or at least be aware of it and try to go over the top by playing 3 or more Lords to get our creature's toughness to the point where we don't really care about Anger of the Gods. And otherwise, just establish a board and hold up some counter magic for all of these instants and sorceries they have. We might want to play some Graveyard Hate so that Snapcaster doesn't get a lot of value. So let's see what our strategy is going to be. I'm going to bring in 1 Disdainful Stroke because it doesn't have too many targets. There's really just the Through the Breach. There's also some Cryptic Commands, but in general, compared to the overall deck composition, there's not a lot of targets. And we do have plenty of other counter spells. Again, including the 3 Spell Pierces, and we'll bring in 2 Dispels, 2 Negates. Got 2 Relics and then 2 Natural States to try to help deal with a resolved Blood Moon. You can see that they've got 3 in the main deck. So this is one of the few decks in Modern that actually pack Blood Moons in the main. It's pretty scary stuff. But they don't have a 4th in the sideboard, so hopefully we just won't see it, and that'll be that. But as far as other targets go for Natural State, they do bring in some Engineered Explosives against us. So if they don't have the mana to play it and crack it at the same time, we might be able to get away with destroying one of these with Natural State. All right, so that's Blue Moon. You don't see it too much, but you come across it every now and then. Moving on, we have Mardu Midrange, which is another Blood Moon deck. This one is black, red, and white, Mardu. And yeah, it's a mid-range deck. It's got a ton of instants and sorceries with only a few creature threats. It's a matchup where Kira is an all-star and Spell Pierce is also really fantastic. You can see down here that we're going to sideboard really, really hard because, well, let's go ahead and take a look. Not only do they have a lot of spells like Kolaghan's Command that are good against us, they also have, after boarding, 4 Blood Moons. And after game 1, they're going to almost certainly decide to bring those in against our blue-green mana base. So that's really difficult. We have to bring in a lot of counter magic to try to prevent that from happening. But they also just have a ton of removal and Engineered Explosives from the sideboard. it's just they have a lot of hand disruption in Inquisition and Thoughtseize. So the combination of those things with Blood Moon makes it a pretty tricky matchup for us to navigate. So my strategy against them is to sideboard pretty hard. We're going to take out our Ether Vials since it's a mid-range matchup, and we want to have as much quality top deck as possible. I'm going to trim 4 Kumena Speakers because of the Blood Moon threat. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention what I take out for Blue Moon. I take out the 4 Spreading Seas since they play islands, 4 Kumena Speakers, and 1 Harbinger since they don't play a lot of creatures we need to bounce. Similarly, against this Blood Moon deck, Mardu midrange, we're going to trim 4 Kumena Speakers because we don't have a ton of green in the main deck. It's just the Kumena Speakers and the Merfolk Mistbinders. Now, Mistbinder, if we get an Ether Vial onto the board, can come in anyway, since we keep them at 2 usually. Now, we're taking Ether Vials out in game 2. So keeping in the Mistbinders is sketchy. We hope that we can answer the Blood Moon. If we don't, then the Mistbinders are going to become dead cards in games 2 and 3. So this is not a matchup I see very, very often, and I need to test it a little bit more, but this is my strategy sort of as it stands. Trim some of the green creatures. You know what? Now that I'm thinking about this, in this matchup, we keep our Ether Vials in, which is a strong point for keeping Mistbinders in, because we can use the Ether Vials, even through a Blood Moon, to get Mistbinder, because we keep them at 2 all the time, our Ether Vials. We're taking Ether Vial out against Mardu midrange, but Kumena Speaker we can play early in the game. So maybe we want to trim the Mistbinder instead. Or maybe we'll keep the Harbinger in and actually just trim like all of our green creatures. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's actually really strong. Let me know what you guys think about this one. I mean, I could be accused of overboarding here, but trimming down on our green requirements seems smart. In which case, it's possible that taking out the natural state is an option, because we might not care so much about destroying Blood Moon anymore. I think we do care still, because all of our lands, like for example, Botanical Sanctum, if a Blood Moon is down, is not just taken off of green, but also blue. I think we still need to deal with the Blood Moon. But we sort of I'm going to take out 4 Mistbinders and leave in one of the Kumena Speakers. Because if we draw that one Kumena Speaker early in the game, even through a Blood Moon game, even in a game with a Blood Moon coming out, we might be able to get a Kumena Speaker down on turn 1 or turn 2. So that's the strategy. I feel fine taking out the green creatures and the Ether Vials, since it is a mid-range matchup that uses Blood Moon. So I don't think it's overboarding bringing in all of these solid spells against them. We still have 23 creatures, with Kira being an all-star there. And then we've got a ton of interaction for them. So that's Mardu midrange. It's a pretty cool deck. They play Bedlam Reveler, which costs less to cast if you have a lot of instants and sorceries in your graveyard, which is something that Relic can help us deal with. If we can keep trimming their graveyard every turn, it could be hard for them to cast this guy. It's sort of like delving in a sense. So if we have a Relic and we bounce this guy, once he's been cast, we can play the Relic, pop the Relic, and then if we bounce this guy with Harbinger, it could be really difficult for them to play the Bedlam Reveler again. So, yep, an interesting matchup, one that we don't see too much, but good to know what it's all about. Junk and Jund, modern mainstays. It's a little bit sad to see that their metagame share is so low right now, but then again, Merfolk is around 1% right now. Now, Junk and Jund both run a ton of instants and sorceries and planeswalkers with not too many creatures. It's a pretty standard sort of mid-range makeup. you can see both Junk and Jund are sort of very similarly built in that regard. So Negate and Spell Pierce are reasonable spells. Now, they can't hit Abrupt Decay, but Spell Piercing a Liliana of the Veil feels pretty good. So we're going to keep our Spell Pierces in. Maybe just trim one of them. Let's see. Negate Relic is good to keep Tarmogoyf and Scavenging Ooze and Lingering Souls, things like that, taken care of. Shaper's Sanctuary, going to be an all-star if we can get that down on game 1. Now, they might be able to Abrupt Decay it. They might be able to Maelstrom Pulse it, but if they're destroying our 1-drop enchantment, we're probably in a good place with our creatures. Again, since they don't run a lot of creatures themselves, being able to deal with them with Dismember is nice. So, since these games can tend to go longer, I decided to bring in 1 Negate and take 1 Spell Pierce out. A slightly more permanent answer in Negate, answering like a late game top deck Liliana or something like that. Definitely 2 Relics, definitely 2 Shaper Sanctuary, definitely 1 Dismember. That's 6 in. Take out our Aether Vials, and then take out, as I said, 1 Spell Pierce, and we can trim 1 Curse Catcher. Since as the game goes longer, Curse Catcher loses some of its value in the matchup. Let's take a quick glance at a Junk list. The main difference between Junk and Jund, and the reason people play white over red in the black-green sort of base is Lingering Souls. Super powerful card. It's always a playset. Get 4 flying blockers. It shuts down a lot of decks. Super good against Grixis Death Shadow, which is the most popular deck in the format. Not that good against Merfolk, since we often have Island Walk. Some other cards that involve white are Siege Rhino. Not every Junk list will run Siege Rhino, but it's still a pretty strong card. Let's see. Path to Exile, of course, is another good reason for running white. From the sideboard, let's see. You've got Gaddock Teague against decks like Tron, I guess. Maybe against Storm. All right. So other white cards: Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. Anything else? Kitchen Finks can be paid for with white mana, and Stony Silence, very important against Affinity. And pretty decent against us, but not decent enough that we're going to bring in Artifact Destruction. All right, so, and then a quick look at Jund. Not super different decks. Red allows him to play Kolaghan's Command, allows him to play Lightning Bolt, Terminate, Goblin Rabble Master. So those are pretty substantial differences, but they both play Lilianas. Similar sideboards. We've got to look out for the board wipes. Spell Pierce should hopefully help us there. Negate can help us there. Okay, so that's enough, I think, about these 2 mid-range strategies. I think they've traditionally been pretty favorable matchups for us. So that's why it's shown in green here. Now, Black-White Eldrazi Taxes can be really difficult because Wasteland Strangler, it's not a spell that we can sort of counter with Dispel or Negate. But it's an effect that kills our creatures and can be repeated with Eldrazi Displacer bouncing the Wasteland Strangler. So those kinds of effects, I mean, Flicker Wisp can reset our Aether Vial. It can be a very, very difficult matchup to win, and one that I'm pretty confident in saying is sort of like a 60-40 matchup. But we do have some good cards against them. Ceremonious Rejection hits most of their spells since they play a lot of colorless stuff, some really juicy targets. Like, let's see, this Tide Hollow Sculler, not a colorless spell, but they've got Eldrazi Displacer, has Devoid, so it's colorless. They've got Thought-Knot Seer, which is super important target for Ceremonious Rejection. And of course, as I mentioned, Wasteland Strangler also has Devoid, something that we would really be looking to counter with Ceremonious Rejection. I wondered about Shaper's Sanctuary because they do have a bunch of things that target our creatures, and we'd love to draw cards off of that. But I don't think it's like borderline. They have just not enough for us to want to bring this in. Natural State is quite good in the matchup, actually, potentially surprisingly for some of you guys. On top of Aether Vial, they've run 4 Tide Hollow Scullers. So we've got 8 really good solid targets in the main deck to hit with natural state, but also from the board they might bring in Stony Silence, though potentially not against us since they also run Ether Vial. Really, I think we're just looking at the Ether Vial and the Tide Hollow Scholar being the best targets for our natural state, but very good targets. So bring 2 natural states in, 2 ceremonious rejections in, and 1 dismember. And we can take out the 3 spell pierce because they don't have really any, well, very few non-creatures, and 2 curse catchers because the games tend to go long, and again, they don't have a lot of non-creatures that we can even counter with curse catcher. So that is Black-White Eldrazi Taxes. Next up, we have one of our worst matchups in Bogles, Green-White Hexproof, 2 different names for it. And, we have some stuff for it that's pretty good. We have negates, natural states, and, surprisingly, Dismember is kind of important. Let's take a look at the list. 4 of their 12 creatures are core Spirit Dancers. This card can get super out of hand because every aura that they cast, they get to draw another card. And this guy just gets buffed for each aura attached to it. So, for example, if they put Ethereal Armor on it, it gets +1 for that enchantment, and then it gets +2 just from core Spirit Dancer's ability, and that's just with 1 enchantment. It just gets utterly insane. So when you put Rancor on it, it doesn't just give +2 O and Trample, it gives +4, +2, and Trample. So core Spirit Dancer does not have hexproof, like Slippery Bogle and Glade Cover Scout. So we do want to bring in our Singleton Dismember, even though we might not get a chance to cast it. It's a bad enough matchup that we bring in anything that can give us a potential edge. So 2 negates, going to hit all of those auras. Natural State, also going to hit those auras once they resolve. Natural State is actually really, really good in the matchup because their Haymaker card is... sorry, I'm looking for it here. These videos are getting so long. My brain. Let's see. Unflinching Courage. Maybe this is a I'm looking for Daybreak Coronet. Oh, there it is. All right. So Daybreak Coronet requires another aura to be attached to a creature for Daybreak Coronet to actually resolve and for it to stick. So if the opponent resolves, say, a Rancor and then a Daybreak Coronet on a creature, if you cast Natural State on the Rancor, then the Daybreak Coronet will fall off. So you can get a 2-for-1 that way very easily with Natural State. Now, the 3 Spell Pierces in our main deck are among the best cards we have in this matchup. And the fact that this list runs 3 Spell Pierces, unlike a lot of other Merfolk lists that either run no Spell Pierce or 1 or 2, 3 Spell Pierce actually gives us a much better chance against Bogles. So we're bringing in 2 Negate, 2 Natural State, 1 Dismember, taking out 4 Harbingers because it can't really bounce anything, taking out 1 Kira because they're not really trying to target our guys. So pretty easy plan. Look for the Spell Pierces, look for the Natural States, look for negates. You might even want to mulligan to those cards in games 2 and 3 because it is such a bad matchup. All right, so moving on, we've got Red-Green Ponza. It's a land destruction deck. They try to ramp really hard with Utopia Sprawls, Birds of Paradise, Arbor Elf. So if they get a Utopia Sprawl on one of their forests, Arbor Elf can untap it, actually making the Arbor Elf contribute 2 mana because if their forest has a Utopia Sprawl on it, it makes 2 mana, Arbor Elf untaps it, and it makes 2 more mana. Ramping into stuff like... well, I actually don't see Garruk in this list. That's interesting. But normally they run, I think it's Garruk Relentless that untaps lands, makes beasts, etc. But they ramp, and then they have a few big threats. They have Inferno Titan, can wipe our board. Stormbreath Dragon goes over the top. Chameleon Colossus is a good choice in a format dominated by Grixis Death Shadow. This guy just waltzes right past him. Thragtusk, really annoying, and Tireless Tracker. So all the while they're sort of trying to destroy our lands with Moanvuli, Acid Moss, and Stone Rain, and establishing a Blood Moon on the board where they can just sort of play freely with Mountain Arbor Elf, Birds of Paradise making red mana. And yeah, so it's a Blood Moon deck. And for that reason alone, it's pretty tricky for us. But we do have some good things going for us in the matchup. Spreading Seas on one of their forests will make a Utopia Sprawl fall off because this can only enchant a forest. So if we turn it into an island, it's a pretty big deal. It's kind of a 3-for-1. We take them off of that land. So if it was a forest, now it's an island. They can't really use it. So that's 1 point for us. We destroy their Utopia Sprawl. That's 2 points for us. And we draw a card off of Spreading Seas. So that's 3 for us off of a Spreading Seas. So a lot of value on Spreading Seas in the matchup. And we've got the Spell Pierces to try to combat Blood Moon, try to combat any land removal that we're unhappy to see. So what's the plan? We're going to bring in 2 Disdainful Strokes, which is excellent because it hits all of their big threats, from Chameleon Colossus all the way through Thragtusk. And it also hits some other stuff. It hits the Mwanvuli Acid Moss. It can hit a Bonfire that's been miracled for 3 or more. Let's see. That might be about it. So Disdainful Stroke definitely have enough targets. Negate, one of the best cards in the matchup. Natural State, it's just defense against Blood Moon. If we have Natural State in hand when the opponent casts the Blood Moon, we can float green mana, destroy the Blood Moon. So we really need to bring this in to help combat Blood Moon. Dismember is as a singleton coming in because it's good against their 4 Tireless Trackers, which, if unanswered, can get a ton of value. And a couple of their threats. It hits Stormbreath Dragon. It's just a 4/4. And unfortunately, it doesn't hit Chameleon Colossus because it has protection from black. It hits Thragtusk, but that's value for the opponent since he gets a beast. But basically, we want Dismember for Tireless Tracker and Stormbreath Dragon. Let's check the sideboard. They've got Choke, which is another good target for Natural State if they happen to bring it in against us. And what else? Oh, that looks like it's just about it. So we're going to bring in 2 Disdainful Strokes, 2 Negates, 2 Natural States, 1 Dismember. We'll take out the 4 Kumena's Speakers because I mentioned earlier, either in this video or in another video before this one, that against Blood Moon decks, we want to trim our green creatures. Now, we're not taking out Aether Vial in this matchup, so we can leave in our Mistbinder comfortably since Aether Vial stays on 2. But we do want to trim our green creatures against Blood Moon, take out 4 Kumena's Speakers, and then we'll take out our Kira. Since they're not really coming at us with spot removal, we can take out Reejerey. Since they might be trying to destroy lands, we might not get to our 3-drops. And if we take out our 2 3-drops, once again, we can take out one of our lands. Take out a Mutavault in this case, so we still have access to our colors. So we're going to run 18 lands against RG Ponza in games 2 and 3. So we have 7 in, 7 out. That's the matchup. Let's go on to the next one. We've got Living End. Let's see. Okay, so we're at the last 4 decks now. Living End and Grishelbrand, 2 sort of all-in combo decks that take up 2% each of the metagame. And at the end, we'll have Merfolk and Elves each taking up a sad 1% of the metagame. So for Living End, it's pretty straightforward. We don't have a lot against them, but what we have is very solid. Spell Pierce, probably, well, definitely one of the strongest cards against them. We've got 3 of them. And then we're going to bring in our 2 relics to keep their graveyard empty and negates to prevent Living End from resolving. So we'll bring in 2 and 2. We'll take out the 1 Reejerey. It looks like I didn't. Okay, so taking out Reejerey and Kira, since they're not targeting our creatures too much, and 3-drops might be hard to get to in this fast matchup, I didn't take out the Mutavault in this matchup. We're still running 19 lands because Mutavault dodges Living End, as long as it's not active when Living End is resolving. Instead of removing a Mutavault, I decided to take out 2 Kumena's Speakers, just since they're our smallest creatures, and we get a lot of value out of Harbinger bouncing their creatures. When Living End resolves, we can throw a creature back to their hand, and then it's cumbersome for them to get it back onto the board, because not only do they have to cycle it to get it in the graveyard again? They have to resolve another living end to then bring it to the board. So Harbinger is really strong. Obviously, Silvergill is really strong. Curse Catcher is a real all-star in this matchup because they're doing their best to resolve living end as soon as possible, but every Curse Catcher that we play pushes it back a turn. So the more that we can slow them down, the better, and Curse Catcher is a really good way to do that. So only 4 spells in, 4 spells out. 3 Spell Pierces in the main deck help a ton, and I feel like these two matchups are actually quite positive because we have pretty good answers for them, basically, in Graveyard Hate and Counter Magic. So that's Living End. Let's talk for a second about Griselbrand. All of our counter spells, except Ceremonious Rejection, are really good against this deck. Let's check out Disdainful Stroke in the matchup. First of all, it hits Nourishing Shoal. If they try to gain a bunch of life and just sort of go off with Griselbrand on the table, we can counter the Nourishing Shoal with the Disdainful Stroke. Of course, there's also 4 Through the Breach, and Disdainful Stroke hits that as well. And those are basically the big targets for the Disdainful Stroke. Looking at Dispel, Negate, their money cards, Goryo's Vengeance, really, is an instant, and Dispel can hit that. So it's just because of Goryo's Vengeance makes Dispel incredible in the matchup, but Nourishing Shoal and Through the Breach also happen to be instants. So countering a huge spell like Nourishing Shoal or a 5-drop like Through the Breach, Dispel, super versatile, super powerful card in the matchup. Now Negate, just doing pretty much the same thing as Dispel, just sort of a broader brush. It can counter Anger of the Gods, it can counter Blood Moon. Let's see, Relics. Griselbrand basically needs to get a Griselbrand in the graveyard to use Goryo's Vengeance. So if we can keep the graveyard empty, we're going to have a much better chance of winning. And again, the 3 Spell Pierces are just bombs in this matchup. We can take out 4 Spreading Seas, even though they're not on blue, really, because they don't have a lot of blockers. We can just kind of go around them. Apart from that, I'm going to take out the 3-drops and a Mutavault and run low to the ground with 18 lands. Ether Vial helps in those situations because if we don't draw a lot of lands, of course, we have Ether Vial to help us out. And I'll trim 1 Kumena Speaker again as just a 1-drop. We do want to be aggressive, but we also want all of our Curse Catchers to slow down their spells, and we want Silvergills and a Harbinger to potentially bounce a Worldspine Worm or bounce a Griselbrand. So, yep, those are those 2 combo decks. I feel like they're somewhat positive matchups for us. Rounding out this sideboarding guide, got Merfolk. I have a list here. It's blue-green. I think we have a slight edge in this matchup against this particular deck because he's running fewer Harbingers, and Harbinger is at its best in the mirror match. I think it can bounce Lords who are attacking, really changing the dynamic of combat. Yep, they've got a Smuggler's Copter, so what are we going to do against this deck? We're going to bring in 2 natural states. You guys know that we keep low land count opening hands if we have an Ether Vial, so if you can blow up their Ether Vial, can just cripple their development. So 2 natural states and 1 Dismember. Not a lot for the mirror, but you know we don't really need that much. It's a coin toss, so we do what we can. You know, we'll take out 2 Spell Pierces, leaving 1 in because you know we can counter a Spreading Seas, we can counter an Ether Vial potentially, we can counter an Echoing Truth or a Vapor Snag or a Dismember. And taking out 1 Spreading Seas, and we only have 3 cards to take out because we only have 3 cards to bring in. And the Spreading Seas can, certain lists don't run a lot of islands, and we really want access to Island Walk. We also want to be able to defend against Mutavault, so I decided to leave in 3 of the Spreading Seas and only leave in 1 of the Spell Pierces. All right, so not really a lot we can do against Merfolk, and I chose to show Elves in my sideboarding strategy just because it's such a bad matchup, even though you see it only 1 in 100 matches these days. Disdainful Stroke, Dispel, Negate, all excellent against Court of Calling and Collected Company. And Dismember just kills their creatures. So Spell Pierce, decent because it can counter their instants, and well, really just their instants, I guess. Court of Calling, and Collected Company, but not amazing because they're kind of a big mana deck, and they can outclass Spell Pierce pretty quickly. But we need all the help we can get in Elves, against Elves. So we're going to bring in 2 Disdainful Strokes, 2 Dispels, only 1 Negate, because we don't really want to go totally bananas on counter spells and just be stuck with a hand with no gas in it. And 1 Dismember. So we'll take out 3 Curse Catchers. Again, since they make so much mana, it's really hard to challenge their Collected Companies and Court of Callings with Curse Catcher. So it's not really doing a lot. Commanding Speaker, on the other hand, doing quite a lot, being able to attack really easily into their 1/1s. And actually into some of their 2/2s, no problem as well, especially if we have a Lord on the table. And then taking out the 3-drop package and Mutavault to run with just 18 lands and Aether Vial, and just free up spots for cards that help us in the matchup. I do think that a list without 3-drops, by taking out the Reejerey and the Kira, can run more comfortably on 18 lands. And yeah, I think the sideboarding strategy is actually pretty good. I think it lets the deck remain explosive while making room for just defensive spells, basically. All right. Well, thanks for watching this with me, guys. It ended up being a bit longer. I didn't really expect to make 3 videos for this, but between explaining my system, going through all of the sort of tier 1 decks, down through tier 2 and tier 3 into the sort of basement of Modern, it took a while to get through. Hopefully it's helpful for you guys. Please share any questions and comments you might have. Subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to support the channel, please check the link above to my Patreon page. And yeah, I'll see you guys in this coming week, where I should hopefully be uploading some gameplay videos of Modern with the inclusion of Rivals of Ixalan. Really excited to test this list. Merfolk Mistbinder has felt really, really strong. Command Speaker is better than ever. And that's it. I'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot. Bye.